I hadn't planned on being behind the mic. I think she's really the impetus. You saw her dragging me into this interview. I was like, cool, your mic's set up. Let's,
I really wanted to make sure she got here. Because honestly, if you're going to give advice to folks out there in the world of college or university broadcasting, maybe even high schools, the companionship of the faculty to the student is one of the big products. But she brings, we plan our ideas together. We talk about, well, what do you think the students would like?
Welcome to Continuing Studies, a podcast for higher education podcasters to learn and get inspired. I'm Neil McPhedran, founder of Podium Podcast Company and higheredpods.com.
And I'm Jennifer Lee, founder at JPod Creations. Podcasting is broadcasting. We want you to know you're not alone. In fact, there are many of you higher ed podcasters out there, and we can all learn from each other.
And a reminder on that note about learning from each other. I've talked about it a couple times in previous episodes, but our Slack channel is live in Higher Ed Pods. And so that's a great place to connect with other podcasters. All you need to do is become a member of Higher Ed Pod. So in the top right corner, just hit that and sign up, become a member, really easy, really quick. And then through that, you'll get your invitation to join the Slack channel. We'd love to have you there.
And it's a great place to be. I'm really enjoying a lot of the conversations with the other podcasters. Like we were talking about monetization the other day, because sometimes as podcasters, you feel a little lonely. So it's a great resource, I think. And so get in there and let's have some more amazing discussions.
Love it. Yeah. And swaps, that's another one that's come up, promo swaps.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to connect with other higher ed podcasters and do something like that, that is the place. And we're going to start to really focus in on that, come back to school. So today, Jen, in this episode, we are chatting with Dr. Ross from the Ask Dr. Ross show. And we had a fantastic conversation. Catherine Ross is the professor of English at University of Texas at Tyler. Dr. Ross teaches British literature, and she launched her podcast, Ask Dr. Ross, a couple of years ago, and they are just going into their next season, starting right around now, actually. And it's a really super interesting podcast where they answer the important and nagging questions parents and potential college students raise about higher education. So topics they've covered off include things like preparing for college, avoiding student debt, secrets of good grades, so on and so forth. Dr. Ross is the host, and she has a co-host as well. And the co-host is actually Worley. She's an honors in mass communication student and the producer as well of Ask Dr. Ross podcast.
She hops on the podcast as well, which we thought was really neat because you can really see how much Dr. Ross appreciates having Ashley on her team. And she really wants everyone to know, like even when we contacted them for an interview, that Ashley has really brought the podcast to a new level. I love seeing that dynamic between teacher and student, because sometimes I think as students, we're kind of scared of our professors a little bit. So I love the bond that they have, and it really rings through in their podcast.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was great. And actually, it was interesting because at first we were going to just be interviewing Dr. Ross. And then quickly early on into the interview, Ashley was there in the background and she pulled Ashley in, and then Ashley's sort of part of the interview as well too. So, which I really like, Jen, how that worked out actually in the end. And in retrospect, we probably should have just sort of said in the beginning, let's interview them both together. But I love how it all worked out where we interviewed them both, and kind of indicative, I would say, of the relationship they have. Let's get into it. Dr. Ross, it's great to have you here.
Oh, I'm happy to see you all and talk with you again.
We actually met Dr. Ross. Usually Neil and I meet the people that we interview first time here virtually. And we got to meet Dr. Ross at our first ever Higher Ed PodCon. So we were like, you have to be on our podcast. So it was really nice to finally meet someone face to face instead of just writing a cold email and be like, you don't know who we are, but we'd love you to come on our podcast. So
yeah, well, I do know who you are, and I'm happy to be here. So don't worry.
Don't worry. There we go.
That's great. That's awesome. So Well, we're calling you Dr. Ross because that's the name of your podcast. So I feel like I can't call you anything else, actually, when we talk to you here. So
You're
ask
welcome to call
Dr.
me Catherine if you want.
Okay. But I love the ring to the Dr. Ross. So the podcast, Ask Dr. Ross, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the podcast and the reason that you launched it.
Well, okay. So I'm in the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Texas at Tyler, and we were given the opportunity to purchase a public radio station about 3 years ago. Everybody was very excited about it. And the dean, who was a friend of mine, came to me and said, we're going to need content. I want you to start a podcast about going to college. And I said, okay, it sounds like fun. I've never done it before. And originally, we have a broadcast professor here who did television, and she seemed to think she could get me launched okay. Well, honestly, it took having a student like Ashley. My first producer was another student who was very experienced with the machinery to do it. But anyway, Dean Gray asked me to talk about college life, and I was thrilled to do that because one of my big concerns right now about higher education is a lot of people have a really skewed idea of what it's like and what we do. And there's a lot of bad press out there. And I thought, well, I think we can tell a better story. The other thing too, though, about it was that I didn't pick the title. I did not want to have my name in it. But the folks on the team who were managing the radio station liked that title. And so there you go. And but anyway, As Dr. Ross does seem to work just fine.
Got a great ring to it.
Yeah.
It sounds like, I have to say, because like growing up here in Canada, and I think they had some in America as well, but it seems very like old school radio program, like Dr. Ross, where you call in for your medical questions. Like, I like it.
Calling in for your college questions.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
then a little spin. Yeah. Like college.
Right. Well, it also gave us a kind of a hook. So what is the question for this day? And sometimes we actually get students who call in, although not as many as we would have liked. In fact, Ashley has to plant questions with some of her classmates sometimes.
We won't tell anyone.
Yeah. But we knew that there are questions we wanted to answer. So there you go.
And can you tell us, she's sitting in the room and we've met her and she's lovely and we know that she's your driving force. Can you tell us a little bit more about Ashley and her role?
Sure. Well, the first year I had a young man who was actually the editor of our newspaper and did a lot of digital things. And he was, what I said in my talk there is that he was real hot, fast, zippy kind of a fella. And he kind of oftentimes outpaced me, the old school lady here. But he moved on and I was desperate to get a new person. And Ashley, who is an honors student in our College of Arts and Sciences and who is also a communications major and does her own movies. What else do you do?
Oh, I write and just stuff in my free time. Like to write books. I do a little bit of illustration just for fun and mostly short films, though.
But she's very technical and I am very untechnical. And so Ashley originally volunteered to do it just for the experience. After about 3 or 4 months, I was able to get the dean to pay her. So it's now her college job. And boy, does she take it seriously.
I love the fact that this is something Neil and I are learning on the podcast beyond just having listens and college and university podcasts, but they're creating different roles within the institutions. And when I went back to university, some of the college jobs were like working in the cafeteria, working at the student union building and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's neat that a lot of them are having these jobs that are going to be things that you could potentially go to work for later in life. So I always find it interesting that when Neil and I look at university podcasting, it's beyond the microphone. People don't realize the power of podcasting. It's not just people talking and giving awareness. It's creating other jobs and opportunities for people.
Oh, exactly. In fact, as soon as I got back from the conference, I went straight to the dean and because everybody was talking about student interns. And Ashley worked so hard. There are days when I wonder if I'm, the abusive employer, that the stuff she does. And so I anticipate, especially as we add more podcasts, the goal of this, now I just have to tell you the sad story is we ended up selling our radio station. There were a number of sort of political issues because we were originally using some National Public Radio kinds of programming. And finally, it just got to be too thorny. So now, however, we have all this equipment and the job of the communications department is to start growing the podcasting program. Now, it's interesting. I'm not in communications. I'm in English. I'm an English professor. But I guess the good news is I have a pretty good voice for this. And apparently people want to ask me questions, so I'm ready to answer them.
That's great. So you're in between seasons right now. So you'll have another season starting as school comes back then?
Correct. And we've already got 4 episodes ready and loaded.
Ours is
Way to
dropping
go.
today. The first episode of season 3 drops today.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Excellent. Okay,
Yeah.
that's exciting. So coincide with the beginning of the school year. So that's great. So
Right. It was the first one is like 10 bits of advice from Ashley and Dr. Ross about how to start out well in the college year, I think is what it's called, something like that.
that's great. So the audience then for the podcast is, I was interested, actually, you called out it's for family and prospective students, and obviously existing students as well. That I thought, I like that. It's very focused on new students and prospective students, basically, but not just the students, the larger family, which is kind of part of the decision-making process, et cetera, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the universities, all universities, and ours is like this, is always bringing people in. We have the top 25% graduates of the local high schools. They bring them in and take them through and show them what UT Tyler's like. And parents come with them. Let's face it, the parents are mostly paying for it, although many of our students are working at least half-time. Again, this comes back to my wanting to tell the story better so people know. One of the first things that high school students seem to learn is that they think all professors are really terrifying and hate you and want to force you to fail. And my students will say, you are really different than what the high school teachers told us you were like.
Yeah.
And that's a part of it. But also the audience out there of adults who are suspicious about higher education. I want them to hear how hard we work to be inviting and help students belong and feel connected.
Yeah, it's so interesting about all the misconceptions that happen in high school. I would also say, too, that sometimes, and it depends where you are, is I just feel in general, and I don't know what country does it better, but I feel like sometimes high school doesn't prepare you enough either for college or university.
Dan, I'm really glad you said that. In fact, I recently wrote an article with a friend of mine who's a principal of a high school, who's also an English teacher, about this disconnect between high schools and colleges. And, the first thing I noticed when I went back to grad school, I'd been teaching at a boys' preparatory school in Dallas before I went back to grad school. And I couldn't believe how different the critical work in English literature was at the university. Because, of course, it was cutting edge compared to what we were teaching our high school students to do. And I thought, oh, my God, this is not good. These parents are paying lots of money to write a kind of essay that was popular 15 years ago. And I think that's one of the things that happens. A lot of high school teachers, they're remembering college from their days. And there's not always that connection. And, of course, I think high school teachers are often anxious about interfacing with us as well. So I would like, one of my big goals in the coming years is to reach out to more and more high schools, to the students, the teachers, the parents, and help them see how different college really is. It's friendlier. The work is very different. The lifestyle is different. And, nothing can prepare you for that. No matter, I don't know if it's big in Canada, but in the U.S., a lot of students are taking what they call dual credit courses. And these are college level courses, but a lot of times they're taking them as a 14 or 15-year-old student. And they're not getting the experience of attending classes twice a week for an hour and 20 minutes and having to manage their own time and figure out how to use the library in a new way, things like that.
Well, there's a big shift that happens from going from, even high school, even if you don't end up going into post-secondary education right away, it's very different because I remember thinking it's like you go, it's very cliquey in university. The teachers kind of treat you differently. And then all of a sudden, this thing you've been doing forever, you leave it. And it's like you're an adult and everyone acts differently around you. Like it's way different. It's like, okay, you got to get a job, pay your bills. It's like everyone starts back at the same level. I remember going to college and it's like everything's out the window now. Like, it is a very different feeling. Everyone treats you like an adult. No one's treating you with like, oh, you're a high school student.
Yeah. Well, one of the series we're working on is I took some students from their freshman year in October and interviewed them. And then we interviewed them again in February, and we just interviewed them again. The first one is, I was so anxious about the professors and I didn't know what advising was and all these sorts of things. Now they're very cool. They've got it down. One of them has already become a resident advisor and he's grown a mustache and he looks like a real grown up. But he also moves with greater assurance, and he changed his major. He didn't know you could do that. And of course, actually, in the conversation that we had from the very first interview, I'm sure I talked about that because I've experienced that a lot with students. Is they come and think, oh, I want to be an accountant. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. And they take a philosophy class and they go, oh my God, that's so different. Or they take a psychology class or an English class and learn that there's something else they can do. The other thing that I think a lot of students don't realize is the name of your major doesn't mean that's what you'll end up doing in life. That there's skills, especially with like an English major or philosophy major, which are in our college, what job do you get with that? Well, you get about 27 different kinds of jobs because of the soft skills you learn about critical thinking and communicating and doing research and solving problems. And that's a big change for a lot of students, is that they come to college thinking they're going to prepare to be a certain kind of worker. And what they learn is that, boy, that's 4 years down the line. You've got some other things to learn how to do. Would you agree with that, Ashley?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Now, Ashley didn't go to a high school. She is a product of homeschooling, which I think is part of the reason why she's so good at what she does, because she's a real self-starter. And a lot of the students that are not homeschooled, that have gone to our public high schools, and I don't mean to say anything ugly about our high schools, but they're more rigid. And I think students don't have quite as much freedom the way Ashley had to sort of develop her skills. So yeah, going back to this, I really love the idea of parents of high school students, teachers in high schools, for them to be part of our audience.
That's great. I love how you're tackling this challenge, as we just described here. Why do you think podcasting is such a good medium to do this? Like, what have you sort of over the last couple of years doing this? I'm sure you've seen some change. It started as a radio show, which is really interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. But just podcasting overall, like, why do you think it's a good channel medium for this?
Well, for one thing, we know it's in that social media area that everybody uses now. Someone said, the great thing about podcasting, it's something for your ears to do when your eyes are busy.
I like that.
Yeah, it's a great line, isn't it?
Yes, I'm going to use it.
And we also, by the way, use that as an excuse to not worry about having to do video of our program, because whereas there may be some folks who want to see what we look like and may be surprised the way we look given our voices. But anyway, yeah, I really think that I see students on their phones all day long, with earphones or earbuds. And so there's that. It's just the way. Now, Ashley, would you agree that it's just so regularly used now by kids, by students?
I think so. And I think the big advantage to trying to spread any kind of a message, but also this one through podcasting specifically, is just because of how accessible it is, like she was talking about. I know that there's a lot of entertainment focus in podcasting as far as I can see, but using it also for education, or having the advantage of this platform where you can blend the entertainment aspects and the educational material, it makes it really easy and a more digestible way of delivering that to students, I think.
Yeah. Another thing we started doing is we started shortening our podcast. We originally we would interview for an hour and a half, and we're cutting it back to 25 minutes because I think that's more accessible also. It's part of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great.
There was a stat recently. They said most podcasts should be between 20 to 40 minutes because that's what the majority of people are listening to at the moment.
Yeah.
I truly believe content dictates.
Yeah.
And I think you could have a shorter podcast or a longer podcast depending on what you have. And it's interesting to go to the you were talking about accessibility and stuff. There was a stat that I would like to find a newer stat on it, but a few years ago they said most people listen to a podcast to learn something new. And that was 85% of the population for podcasting. So it's like, yes, entertainment's there, but most people are listening to learn.
Well, and one of the things I like about what Ashley does is, she posts with description of what's coming. And so people know what they're listening to. We try to make a title that is clear about what you will learn. If you want to learn this one, this is the one to learn from.
I was
Yeah.
going to say, speaking of learning something new, I just had a question about this because it was interesting. I heard it yesterday. I was in a coffee shop and just ironically, two teachers were talking about using AI in English and written papers, using
Ah.
Grammarly, and how the students, it's changing the way that they write and they don't have those hardcore skills of learning English in a proper way. So I was just wondering, because obviously you're in the post-secondary space, maybe it's an episode for your next season. Are you going to do anything on how to prepare to use AI properly when you're a student?
I just finished sitting in for 2 days on the Harvard Open AI Summit and
Wow.
heard the fellow from Princeton who, it was that Princeton, under his work with his grad students, that created ChatGPT. And he gave a very interesting talk about what he thinks AI is going to do, and then different workshops about where we're going to take it. I'm actually an early adopter. I've been using it ever since I started seeing what it could do. And it's my view that it will become as common in everybody's use as a calculator is. And I think one of the ways it's going to do, and this is one of the areas that worries me, is it will write for you. And I know one of the things that came out in this workshop yesterday with all these folks from Harvard and Cambridge and Stanford and MIT was that a lot of people use it regularly to compose their emails. And I will admit to having taken an email that I was, I remember one of them, I was really mad at my students for doing something. And I composed this email. I thought, oh, if I send that, that's going to really tick them off and it will not be successful. So I sent it through AI and it made it much better, so that there's good reason to do that. Although the big worry for teachers of English is that students will not learn how to write and think through. The thing I like about AI is that it predicts and it surveys what is out there in general usage. One of the hardest things for students to learn how to write is to write like more sophisticated writers write. And so that's really what AI does. When you ask it to write something, it will pull on the sort of common vernacular, which is usually a much more sophisticated level than high school students and college students are used to. Yes, there's a big issue about using it ethically. It's biased. And they pointed that out in one of the workshops, how biased it could be, kind of Western white world bias. But it's ubiquitous already, and it's going to be a part of our life. And so I have all my students take their first assignment, and before they write it themselves, ask AI to write it. And then I say, okay, now don't look at that. Put that aside, and now you write it and we'll compare them so they can see. But yeah, it's going to be a big problem. And, it's interesting. Some folks are saying, no AI, period. It's a terrible thing. I think that's a big mistake. I think we need to pull it in. Yeah.
I think you're right. It's a good way to look at it. It's going to be ubiquitous like the calculator is. There was a lot of pushback over that, wasn't there? I wasn't around. We weren't around then, but I mean, I've read about that. So yeah.
Well, I do think, the fear is that people will not learn how to do the things that AI does for them. And that's going to be my argument to them is that, yes, AI will do it for you, but you need to be able to do it too. And be able to also make it your own. Because, so for example, this morning I was writing an email to the provost about a problem I have with the funding for my fellowship. And I wrote 2 versions on my own, and then I ran it through ChatGPT. And I still like mine better, but I do think it can help students see the difference between a kind of clunky, not very elegantly phrased sentence and a more elevated level of sentence structure that they can start imitating.
See, this is going to be like a 4-part podcast episode on the Dr. Ross Show.
Yeah.
Well, let me add one other thing. I'm part of the American College University Association. It's got a national institute on AI starting this month. And I'm part of that. There are 4 of us at UT Tyler. I've been asked to be part of that. So I'll be somebody you can consult about AI because I'm really looking forward to what this big consortium is going to be able to teach me.
I'm going to do a plug here for another podcast that we work with, which is called Normal Curves. And it's 2 statistics professors that have just launched a podcast. It's a really good podcast. Their episode this past Monday, so if you're listening to this, that would be sort of August 12th, basically, that dropped, there's the MIT study that came out about a month ago that was basically saying your brain is mush on AI and it's ruining our brains and our critical thinking. they rip the paper apart because it's
Yes.
actually really bad science of the paper. So that's not a true proposition. But anyway, listen to the episode. It's really good. It's super
I
interesting.
will. I'm glad to know that.
Normal curves.
Yeah.
I wanted to circle back to the show though, because I like how you've anchored everything in a question. And back to your point about the title, you're totally right. You guys do a good job with that. So instead of tackling a theme and doing an episode about a theme, you're still doing that, but you've brought it to a question to start with. I like that format a lot. Maybe just sort of for someone who's thinking about tackling the same problem or coming up with a show for family and students like you have. Am I right about anchoring it in a question? It seems like a really good strategy.
Well, we kind of fell into it, to be honest, but it actually fits with a kind of basic teaching principle, which is that the really best way to focus a course is to have it focused on questions, big questions, rather than saying, I'm going to tell you this. Let me ask you a question. What makes for a meaningful life? What makes a really effective novel? Why do people go to war? I mean, I'm making really big ones there, but you can make them more and more nuanced. And when you ask a question, then you're inviting people in. Part of my job is to answer the question, but also to get other people to answer it. So, for example, one of the early ones with my first producer, Nathan, who was very upset about politics. And so I brought in the political science professor, and he was able to, why is it so crazy right now? Professor Bryant could talk to him about that. Did the same thing he was very upset about the economic situation. I brought in an economics professor, and she was able to explain to him about the ebb and flow of economies and things like that. I don't think he was convinced at all, but we gave him the opportunity to ask his questions.
Ah.
I think a lot of higher ed could really use yours as an example to take a question and build a topic around it. Because I think a lot of the times when people, and this goes for any podcasters, a lot of times when people are doing a podcast, specifically when it's related to an institution or a business or a brand, they try to think of titles and topics that are not necessarily searchable or things that people are inquiring about. Or they have a great topic, but then they try to do a title that's too sexy, and they spend 20 minutes trying to crack down on the title. And it's like, no, just tell me what it is.
Yeah.
Am I going to learn how to do math? Because that's what you got to remember when I'm the listener, I'm searching for these topics. I want to know why.
It's true as well. Yeah.
I love your topics. They're so easy. And now I know that Ashley was the inspiration probably for this, but how can homeschoolers prepare for college? Very straightforward. I know what I'm going to get. Ashley, did you do a good job on that one?
I think it was a fun episode. We had several of my friends, one of whom I was at the same homeschool co-op with for college prep in high school. We all got to come and have a conversation about that together. But yeah, I think the questions do help with keeping on a topic and making sure that we're giving something very practical and that's useful to the audience member, whoever they might be.
It also in line with this notion of I want to dispel misconceptions about higher education. When I got ready to introduce Ashley at the PodCon, our workshop, she asked me not to identify her as a homeschooled student. Oh. And the reason is that there's a lot of negativity about that. And, she doesn't come from the fringe types of folks who do homeschooling, but she was afraid that that would give the wrong impression. And once you met her, you knew, and my God, this girl has done, her work ethic is unbelievable. And I'll add this, when we went to the conference, her parents came with us. And I got to meet her parents, and now I know why she's so good, because they're just wonderful. Her father was actually an actor in New York and LA for a while. Before we did our presentation, we went up to their hotel room and said, would you all listen to us and make sure we got this right? And what was really charming is his father says, well, I didn't expect it to be that good. I've got a really high standard. And that really lifted our wings because we weren't sure how it would come across. So anyway, yeah, I think that whenever we can answer questions and help people out of confusion, that's what my whole job is as a professor. That's what I'm always doing. You read a novel and, this chapter, and why did that character do that ridiculous thing? Or why did the writer write it that way? And what does this mean? And so explaining all of that is sort of what I do.
Yeah, I think it's excellent. When you first introduced yourself in your show, the title and your name, it works well together. And I got an idea what the show was. And So it's very memorable and I like it. You mentioned a few minutes ago in our conversation when you came back from PodCon, you went to the dean and you talked about sort of opening up the aperture on podcasting overall. And now with the change in the radio station and the equipment or whatever, is there anything you can sort of give us insight into there? I think that's interesting. Where are you guys going with podcasting then?
Well, and again, this is a little tricky because I'm in the English department and
Right.
he's tasked the communications department with developing things. But I think they look at my podcast as sort of a model for people to follow. We now have a professor. In fact, I passed out her cards. It's called A Verse Reaction. It's one of the English professors. She's an Americanist. It's about verse and poetry. And so she did that. And it's, as you say, kind of an evergreen, freestanding thing. The professor who came to talk about politics is working on a political, and although honestly, right now with the political situation in the state of Texas, I'm not sure he's going to do that for a while. Although I would love for him to do it because he's so sensible and reasoned. It would be really nice to have somebody talk about politics who isn't, real red or real blue and, kind of over the top angry.
We need way more sensibility and reasonability, please. Yes.
Right. But to go back to your question, the dean has charged the department, and one of the people, when we lost the radio station, several employees had to go too, but we did keep the director of that, her name is Lori Allen, and she is a very, very fine public speaker. She's got all these awards for that. There's some sort of group she belongs to, and she was a television newsreader in Dallas and I think in Colorado. And so she's remained on. And so she's the person who we report to now. And that will be her job soon, is to start, building that out. But it'll be kind of up to the faculty and then what students they can recruit. Of course, I wanted the dean to understand that we could make a good argument for students using it as a professional line item on their resumes.
Yeah.
And, the folks at Stanford, your keynote speaker, he talked about that. He's got all sorts of volunteers. Yeah.
Yep. Matt has, he gets approached for interns like a lot of professors do, but he puts them to work on the show. And then to your point, they use that as part of their CV. They're doing a real job on a show that they can point to, and it's everywhere, right? So I completely agree with you. It's not just a tool for communicating, but it's also a platform for, your show is a prime example for students to get real experience and have a real job in
I think
case.
Ashley will tell you that she has a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And I mean, honestly, when do you get the opportunity to get paid to do all this kinds of just straight up fun stuff? Like you can talk to all these various kinds of people and then listen back to the conversations. I find editing fun. I'm a mass comm student, and so that's a big part of what I do. So yeah, it was a crazy, amazing opportunity when this became like a paid position, because I know also a lot of podcasts just start with a microphone and a laptop in somebody's bedroom, and you have to work at it for a long time before that ever becomes a paid opportunity. So I felt very, very lucky.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many paid opportunities we'll have. The dean was happy with the idea on the one hand of offering it as a volunteer opportunity, but I think for Ashley, starting out as a volunteer and then getting good at it, we were able to move it into a paid position.
Yeah. I think it's great that she's part of the show. I think it's great that you have this, you have a co-host that's a student, because I think that lends probably a lot of credibility to the like the high school students or the new students to hear the co-host is a student too, right? So I think that's great. That's a great dynamic.
Well, and if you listen to the episode just dropped and the one after that, we did a tip. There are 2 tip episodes. The second one is about tips on how to make friends. We had so much fun doing them. And I remember after, Ashley will edit it and throw it back to me and say, what do you think? And I'll say, well, let's cut this out and da-da-da-da. I really enjoyed it. Sometimes when I'm listening to it after we've already done, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's pretty good. But actually, I got kind of a kick out of listening to it. I felt like we've really, over the year, we've really developed a rapport that I enjoy very much. And I will add, going to the PodCon conference was part of that, because we had such a good time there. And, eating breakfast with her parents was a hoot. I must tell you, you should all meet her parents.
I hadn't planned on being behind the mic. I think she's really the impetus. You saw her dragging me into this interview. I was like, cool, your mic's set up. Let's.
It's great. I love it. I love how this has ended up. It's perfect. It's really good. So
Yeah, I
very
told
cool.
her I needed her to set up. I didn't use Squadcast, and I had to borrow a mic from our digital design studio. And I told her all that, but I really wanted to make sure she got here. Because
Great.
honestly, if you're going to give advice to folks out there in the world of college or university broadcasting, maybe even high schools, the companionship of the faculty to the student is one of the big products. But she brings, we plan our ideas together. We talk about, well, what do you think the students would like? She brought up, we have a thing called rec sports and also esports. And I didn't know anything about esports. And so we've got an episode on both of those. So
Great. My son's a big gamer, so I understand the esports thing.
Oh,
so
do you?
There you go. So, well, it's been fantastic to chat with both of you today. And thank you so much for sharing a few things with us. Can I leave you with a tip for your YouTube channel? And maybe this is for other listeners out there as well, too.
Absolutely.
About 6 months ago, YouTube provided the ability to actually designate, there's a podcast tab. So you're basically calling your show a podcast. You're telling YouTube it's a podcast, and it categorizes it differently. And then it puts the podcast in the tab where there's shorts and videos and everything in the tab, actually adds it as a podcast in there. So then the algorithms start to recognize it as a podcast and then put it in the mix of podcast shows. What it does immediately is it just sort of signals something very differently to YouTube as well. YouTube is actually two apps, right? It's the main app, which we're all familiar with. And then there's 1 billion people use YouTube Music, which is the competitor to Spotify. So it's especially important for that because then they have a full podcast section in that app. And then your show starts to index in that. Right now, it's not indexing in the podcast component, although it's a podcast.
That's great. We will, as soon as we get off of this, we're going to fix that right
That's
now.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what? This is, we'll put in our show notes. There's a really good link to YouTube of setting up a podcast in YouTube. We'll make sure for listeners, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes.
Great.
Wonderful to have you guys. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was fun talking to you. See you again.
Jen, loved that. Loved our conversation. I wish she was my professor when I was in university, taking English, struggling through English. I think she would have been the professor I would have wanted to have learned from. But yeah, really, really enjoyed that conversation. Learned a lot. And there is some really, just as we said kind of off the top, and as I think you've probably heard through the interview, like, what a dynamic that Dr. Ross and Ashley have. And obviously that just makes the show that much better.
Yeah. And I love that. You can just see they complement each other so perfectly. So it was great. And we knew that from the start when you and I met them the night before the podcast show, when we did our little mixer. Just so kind and lovely energy.
Yeah. I think it's just a great podcast theme. I love the name of it, as we talked about. I think it's a useful resource for prospective students, not necessarily going to the University of Texas. But I also think it could be the kind of podcast that other professors, students, whatnot, could mimic for their schools as well, if you really want to get into it, being more specific about the school itself. So I think there's a lot of really cool things that we as higher education podcasters could learn from the Ask Dr. Ross show.
Agree. It's not limited to just there. So these things are things that other students need to know. Like, I want to know what is the secret to good grades. I feel like that's an amazing topic.
You're done. You already did university.
I did, but I wish I knew that back in the day. Anyways, on that note, thank you for tuning into the Continuing Studies Podcast, a podcast for higher education podcasters. We hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. If you enjoyed the show, we encourage you to follow and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred platform so you'll never miss an episode. But if you found this episode particularly valuable, please consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues who also might be interested in higher education podcasts. We also invite you to join your peers on higheredpods.com, where you can connect with other podcasters in higher education and learn from others in the field. Thank you for being part of our community. We look forward to continuing to bring you valuable insights and conversations around higher education podcasts. See you in the next episode.